Julian has done us a great service. He's standing between us and those that wish to control us with their fake media. And Google Julian Assange petition. 575,000 people have signed this petition. I urge you to
That in my face, so close, get a step back. Can you give me a bit more space?
people that believe in freedom of the press, justice, and democracy.
Somehow I was implied to Julian Assange, the standard you will practice, the standard you accept. Australia is accepting Julian Assange in the process of his being crucified by the British justice system. But the real villain in the piece, is of course the United States of America. So I'd like to read a few words that I've just read, written by Caitlin Johnson. And she says, and I quote, "The US empire is ugly and creepy. The more you look at it, the uglier and creepier it gets. That is why so much effort goes into keeping the public from looking at it directly. The US empire has two faces, one rooted in the West Coast and the other in the East. The first face, which spouts up from Hollywood, presents a grinning plastic smile to the world, depicting how fun and wonderful and righteous America is, and how all its systems are working completely fine. The second face, which sprouts from Washington, D.C., Arlington and Langley, is wild-eyed and covered in blood. Just like any other two-faced monstrosity, the face you will see depends on where you are standing. If you live in wealthy Western nations like this one, or in the US itself, you are mostly presented with the first face. The artificial culture pipeline runs from Hollywood to the rest of the world and keeps everyone seeing American life as fun, enjoyable, and packed full of hilarious repartee interspersed with the sexual attention of beautiful women and kicking bad guys into molten lava. Freedom and democracy trademark capitalism is totally working. You can trust these guys to run the world, and now we'll stop for a brief commercial break. But if you live in the Middle East, Asia, or the global South, you are far more likely to encounter the second face, the blood-spattered face, the face of murder, the face of tyranny, the face whose actions amount to nothing other than an endless war on disobedience, where any government which tries to insist on its own national military resource, commercial or financial sovereignty is smashed into the dirt by any means necessary until it either collapses or complies. And I'm going to add a few words of my own to Caitlin Johnson's here. Americans should have seen this scenario very clearly when John Mearsheimer, a so-called independent expert on US foreign policy, an American by chance, spoke at a debate sponsored by the Centre for Independent Studies in Canberra in August 2019. Now, he urged Australia to join the USA in confronting China. And he threatened us all by telling us that if we did not, and these were his words, "You don't know how nasty the USA can be." Well, I think, thanks to Assange, we do know just how nasty the USA can be when it comes to military matters. So going back to quoting Caitlin Johnson, that's all the US empire ever is, really, a murderous, tyrannical, planetary oppressor, covered up by varying degrees of dishonesty. During the Trump administration, the depravity was a little more honest about itself. Now, during the Biden administration, it's a little more dishonest. The only major change is the thickness with which the makeup is slathered over the skull.
As long as Julian remains incarcerated, there's a war on journalism. And it will take a very brave journalist to stand up, as Julian has, against the empire, against the US empire, and tell them that they've done something wrong. And believe me, they've done a lot of things that are wrong. A lot of things.
We are the Julian Assange Sydney Town Hall gatherers. We've been gathering here for over a year, every Friday from 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. In winter, we're here from 4 until 6 o'clock. And what we do is we tell you a little bit about what's happening with Julian Assange in Melrose prison in the UK. He doesn't have the right to step out of his cell. He's in his cell 24 hours a day. And he's also in a prison at the moment ridden with COVID infestation. So his life is in danger. Recently, Magistrate Barrezza, in one of the courts in London, determined that there should not be an extradition because of health reasons. She said Julian Assange should not be extradited to the US. However, she decided to put him back in prison just so that the US will have an opportunity to file an appeal. Now the US did, they filed an appeal, but they didn't give sufficient grounds. So what did Magistrate Barrezza do? She gave them more time. So she has given them more time to file detailed grounds of appeal. That appeal should really fail. In fact, the entire extradition request should fail because it is bad in law. And so says so many legal scholars, so many prime ministers, former prime ministers and presidents, so many human rights organizations, even 24 parliamentarians here in Australia say that it is a bad extradition request. And we want to tell you that the reason behind all of this is really an attack on journalism and freedom of expression. And I wanted to read to you a document from Assange's defense, which is one of the many organizations trying to bring awareness about this matter. And it says the following: Julian Assange is being sought by the United States for publishing US government documents that exposed war crimes and human rights abuses in 2010. This is politically motivated, and the charges represent an unprecedented attack on press freedom and the public's right to know. They're seeking to criminalize basic journalistic activity. If Julian Assange is convicted, he faces a sentence of 175 years. Of course, this means Julian Assange would die in prison. So effectively, this is capital punishment. Whichever way you paint it, that's what it is. It's a death sentence. And whatever years Julian Assange would spend in prison, it would be in extreme isolation. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention called on the UK government to end Mr. Assange's deprivation of liberty, to respect his physical integrity and freedom of movement, and to afford him the rights to compensation. We replicate the same demands here in Australia. Australia must do everything necessary to end Mr. Assange's deprivation of liberty. They must respect his physical integrity and freedom of movement, and they have to give him the right to compensation for the years he has spent in prison. This year, Julian Assange has been nominated once again for the Nobel Prize for Peace. So he is an acclaimed journalist, an Australian, a citizen, completely innocent, simply in jail for close to 2 years in a high security prison for publishing information in the public interest, for letting you and I know about crimes committed against humanity, war crimes committed by the US and by other governments. That is it. That is the reason why Julian Assange is in prison. It should not be permitted. It is degrading to see our government to keep quiet about this issue. We need Julian Assange to be freed, to be released, to be brought back home. This is what he says. We want Julian Assange back home in Australia. We want him to continue with his career as an extremely successful, truthful journalist. That's what we should do. We should not be permitting the continuation of this fraudulent use of our legal systems to silence journalists.
It seems that Assange is going to be tortured for a lot longer. Now, the judge who is looking after his case said that they were not going to extradite him, but however, they weren't going to give him bail until the Americans had a chance to appeal the decision against the extradition. So, the Americans are still pondering how they could possibly imprison a man for espionage when there is no profit to be had. There's no country that he gave information to. The only people he gave information to was you and me. Through the media, through the mass media, through the Guardian, through the Times, through the Herald here in Sydney, through the Age in Melbourne. He gave us information through the proper channels. And that information contained evidence of atrocities against civilians all around the world, but particularly in the Middle East, in Iraq. An Iraqi arena which was an illegal war, which 500,000 people here in Sydney marched against, people in London, people in New York, people all around the world marched. So it wasn't a war we wanted. But once that war commenced, we hoped that there would be some kind of civility involved, but no. It was abject torture on behalf of the Iraqi people, men, women and children, tortured, their houses burst into in the middle of the night, their streets saturated with bullets during the day. It was mass murder on a massive scale. Now Assange told us all this. He told us what was happening, and that news was passed to us through the media. Now the media aren't on trial, although they were the messenger. They're the ones that told us. They're the ones that splashed it all over the television screens. That's how we know. So the reason they're going after him is because they don't want the message of what they're doing to the world to reach our ears. We're not important. Our job is to go out there, to work, to make them profit, to make these big corporations that with their names all over this city profit, to make the warmongers profit. And as long as they're making profit, we're allowed to work in some semblance of peace. But as soon as we speak, as soon as we make ourselves known, then we become a danger.
And Assange is, this poor man here, is a danger to society because he tells us what our government is doing. He tells us about the evils of our government, and he tells us the evils of other governments too. All they want to do is crucify him to get him out of the way. Now, if you want information about any of the wrongdoings of other countries, WikiLeaks has got tons of material if you really want to know. Because your media doesn't want you to know, your media wants you to concentrate on him, to destroy him. The reason they want him out of the way is because they want the truth out of the way. Now, what can we do about it? Well, we went to see my local member yesterday, Tanya Plibersek. Okay, we've been there many times, and I've asked her for an appointment to speak to her. She's too busy. She's too busy to speak to her constituents. Why is she there? I said, can we have an appointment next year? No, she's too busy next year. Okay, so what do we do? Well, we have to target these politicians who aren't towing the line. The politicians that want to keep us in the dark. If Tanya Plibersek and Scott Morrison and all the rest of the crowd down in Canberra want to keep us in the dark, then they have to be punished. Whether they're from the so-called left or the so-called right is irrelevant. Whether they're Liberal, Labour, Green, Independents, whatever, if they're not going to look after our interests, and our interest is knowledge, we have to know what's going on in our world. Whether it's the climate, whether it's warmongering, whether it's viruses, we have to know. And the only way we're going to know that is if we have whistleblowers and freedom of press. And our freedom of press has been suppressed to a degree that we have no idea what's going on. We should know what's going on. And we need people like Assange. It's important that you get behind any group that can support free speech in this country and of course across the world. So when it comes to the election, ask your candidate, what do they think about free speech? What do they think about free press? What do they think about us knowing what's going on? Okay, and if they give you a blank look, it means that you have to move on and find a candidate that will allow you to be told what's going on. Whether you're 15, 50, or 150, you have a right to know what's going on in the world around you. And that right has been stripped from you, and it's been stripped daily. That right will never be returned unless we hold on to it now. If we lose that right now, then that right is gone forever. So let's concentrate on this next election, find the people who are going to protect our liberty, our freedom, and our right to knowledge. Find out who they are and give them your support. And actively campaign against those that aren't looking after your interests. This is your interest we're talking about. Julian Assange has already given his life. He's given 10, 12 years of his life, and another 10 years before that. 20 years and a man is barely 50 yet is a long time. So if you can give it a couple of days, a couple of hours, just to protect your own future. Thank you very much.
This is our 63rd Friday since we started gathering at Sydney Town Hall to promote public awareness of the unjust and barbaric political persecution of Julian Assange, a journalist who founded WikiLeaks and famous for revealing horrific war crimes, torture and high-level corruption. Recent freedom of information requests by Kelly Tranter have revealed our federal government has been well aware of Julian's suffering, and yet it insists it has no power to act. Well, it does have the power to act. A simple public acknowledgement of what it knows about Julian's suffering would be a great start. Scott Morrison and Maurice Payne are at liberty to approach the UK and the US diplomatically on behalf of Julian and to seek his immediate release and bring about an end to the torturous conditions he is enduring. We stand here today because we have found out the truth about Julian Assange. We are happy to stand up in a crowd of ignorance and speak the truth about Julian Assange. We refuse to be intimidated by the depth of cruelty exerted on Julian Assange, because we know that to do so will only make things worse. We speak the truth and we speak up for the right to know the truth, because we know that ultimately we are all Julian Assange. Mass surveillance, social media censorship, and the profusion of anti-human propaganda reveal that free speech is under grave attack. We are people who wish to simply live like people. We want to know and share the truth, and we demand the freedom to know and share the truth. We demand the freedom of Julian Assange, who should be free because he is completely innocent. The reason Julian is being persecuted and demonised is because the powerful wish to silence his truth-telling activities and intimidate others who may wish to follow in Julian's footsteps. Free Julian Assange. The effort to silence the truth is great and it costs millions, but our voices are powerful. We are compelled to speak up in an effort to create the democracy we want and deserve. We are all Julian Assange. We must keep fighting for the freedom of Julian Assange. The persecution must be stopped. We must break the power of propaganda. We must all learn to research the truth and think for ourselves. We must unite to free Julian Assange. Julian's freedom is our freedom. We're currently seeing the escalation of censorship on social media platforms. Many supporters of Julian Assange are having their accounts suspended. Many independent journalists who have reported honestly about Julian Assange have found their YouTube channels being demonetised. The online hostility towards free speech is now at an all-time high. Ironically, nothing violates community standards more than the censorship of free speech by the big tech corporations that run popular social media platforms. We depend on free speech to hold governments to account. PanQuake is a new Twitter-like social media platform. PanQuake is a brand new platform being developed to address the serious problems arising from this big tech censorship. Many of PanQuake's backers are prominent supporters of Julian Assange. PanQuake relies on public funding and has raised 80% of its $50,000 goal. You can find out more on panquake.com and how to make an early donation to help speed up the development of this exciting new platform. We must push back against rampant power grabs. If powerful entities attain the means for total control, they'll have no reason to ever appear to be kind and reasonable to any of us. This is the trajectory unless we can wake up the people from the illusion of democracy and benevolent power. All we have to do to realise the truth of this is to look at the treatment of Julian Assange. If we want the rights of human beings to be respected, we must act as human beings rather than as sheep. Speak up. Risk losing your income if you must. Allowing the violation of human rights is not a viable option for any of us. The people must know the truth. Censorship used to cover up and hide the truth of criminal activity is a great crime. Torturing to death a journalist who exposes his great crimes cannot be allowed to continue. We must fight to free Julian Assange. This week, Julian Assange received yet another nomination for this year's Nobel Peace Prize from two Australian Greens senators, Peter Whish-Wilson and Janet Rice. How many times does a true hero of truth and peace have to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize before everyone realises that it is time to do something about his persecution? Join with us to free Julian Assange. Many hands make light work. When we all speak up on behalf of Julian Assange, his persecutors will have no option but to free him. We will win this, but we need all hands on deck, and the sooner this happens, the better. We are all Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange. Free Julian Assange.
It's a wonderful day. I'm glad many people are coming by to check out the campaign and show an interest in freeing Julian.
Inmate Julian Assange.
Free.
Julian Assange.
And David McBride.
Let's not forget David McBride. He's another one of our homegrown heroes. we must stand solidly behind David McBride, Bernard Collaery and Witness K. These are truly great and brave Australians because they stand for justice and fairness and openness and for the innocent civilians that are being killed and made homeless in their tens of millions. And I urge you all to take note of an Australian businessman by the name of Ian Melrose. He's running a series of ads on commercial and national television stations. And he is calling for criminal charges to be laid against those responsible for these wars, including prime ministers, ex-prime ministers, and so forth.
But I think it's also fantastic how people here have felt encouraged enough and brave enough to just speak and talk about Julian. And none of us are public speakers, none of us are, personalities, but we just come here every Friday and we keep on going. And I think that's amazing that people manage to get that courage, and I think courage is contagious.
People don't know enough about Julian because he's not covered nearly enough on the mainstream media. And have a leaflet, mate.
Thank you.
And it's about Julian Assange.
The fact that in every country now, every country they have a group that is working on getting Assange's issues up there. I see photographs, I see recordings, videos, songs. There's so many people everywhere now, even in places that are very remote. I've seen African countries with a group for Assange, certainly lots of European countries, South American countries, Asian countries, the Philippines, etc. And I think that's important. People are out there saying, reminding our world leaders that we've got journalists in prison. Julian Assange.
Yeah, well, the whole world needs to understand we need complete and absolute freedom of speech everywhere. What they're doing to the media generally is it's becoming too concentrated on what the corporatized governments want us to hear and not concentrated nearly enough on all the other things, such as, for example, what are the corporatized governments doing with everybody's tax dollars in terms of these wars they're sponsoring and that sort of thing. We need complete transparency in terms of what's going on in all these places such as Iraq and Afghanistan. What are the militaries of all these Western world countries doing there? And they need to free Julian Assange and all the other people they're holding, they need to free them as well. Hey there, can I give you a bit of information?
Yeah, right. Of course
Good on you,
can.
thank you.
These ladies want to be on the email list?
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. What this means is we just have an email list and we tell you every week. We remind you of this.
Okay.
Like yesterday we had about 12 or 13 of us go to Tanya Plibersek's office, and sadly she's not there at the moment, but that was okay because we had all signed the petition for her and we delivered it to her reception there. So we have events like that, but we have this event, and this event is getting bigger and bigger, as you can see. Hopefully it continues to do so. So this just reminds you that we're here. So you're welcome to, you don't need a phone number, just your name, first name and email address is absolutely terrific.
I don't think it's right.
No, it's disgusting what they're doing.
And treats him like that for just exposing the truth.
Yeah, no, and there are a lot of us starting to speak up now. The Prime Minister needs to contact Britain and have him, freed. Have him, they need to organise Great Britain
Preach louder! Fuck the government!
Yeah, but you're always welcome.
I won't be able to carry it.
Julian Assange, our mate.
There is only one decision! No extradition! Julian Assange! Inmate! 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 Julian Assange! Inmate! Inmate! Julian Assange! No extradition! There is only one decision!
No extradition!
Free! Free! Julian Assange! Free! Free! Julian Assange! Only one